Welcome, dear listener. Take a deep breath and let go of the day. You are exactly where you need to be, right here, right now, in this moment of calm. As you settle into the gentle rhythm of your breath, know that you are safe. You are at ease. And tonight, we're going on a journey into deep, restful sleep. Let the soft whispers of this story guide you, each word a step closer to the tranquility you seek. With every breath, you'll feel lighter, drifting further into the comfort of stillness. And when you awaken, you will feel refreshed, renewed, and ready for a beautiful tomorrow. So close your eyes, let your mind wander, and trust that sleep will embrace you soon. And remember, if sleep doesn't come right away, our next story will always be here, ready to guide you into the sweetest dreams. Now, let's begin. Discovery of the Rosetta Stone. For millennia, the Grand Pyramids of Egypt have towered over the desert sands. Everything about the great ancient civilization that once thrived in these lands remained a mystery. That is, until July 19th, 1799, when a French soldier discovered a large stone about 35 miles east of Alexandria during Napoleon Bonaparte's Egyptian expedition. This discovery unearthed a written language that had been dead for thousands of years. The subsequent translations of this stone would be the key to unlocking the secrets of an entire civilization. The lifeblood of Egypt, the Nile. As the ancient Greek historian Herodotus said, Egypt is the gift of the Nile. The Nile River has been the lifeblood of Egypt, providing water for the cultivation of crops, which led to the flourishing of civilization along its length. The river's fertile banks and the annual floods created an ideal environment for the rise of a great society. Formation of the Nile Valley. The story of ancient Egypt begins in the Miocene times when the Nile Valley was formed, cutting its path into its current shape. The geographical resources of the region, particularly the fertile soil spread by the Nile's annual floods, contributed significantly to the foundation of the Egyptian state. Over centuries, mud deposits built up as the floodwaters receded, marking the beginning of the agricultural year. This made Egypt one of the first agricultural communities in human history. Neolithic developments. At the end of the Paleolithic era, there was widespread production of tools like arrows, harpoons, and pottery. Carbon-14 tests have revealed that corn was harvested in a Neolithic silo on the edge of Thiam between 4600 and 4250 BC. People built shacks and huts out of reeds and solid mud, cultivating corn on the muddy soil of the Nile marshes. Unification of Egypt. Ancient Egypt was divided into two territories, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Lower Egypt was in the north, where the Nile extended out with its several branches to form the Nile Delta. Upper Egypt stretched to the south, reaching Aswan. Around 3000 BC, these two kingdoms were united by King Narmer, though each retained its own regalia. The headjet, or white crown, was for Upper Egypt, and the deshret, or red crown, was for Lower Egypt. As a result, the pharaohs were known as the rulers of the two lands, and they wore the pshent, a double crown, with each half denoting sovereignty of a different land. Pre-dynastic period. The pre-dynastic period in ancient Egypt, spanning roughly from 6000 to 3150 BCE, precedes recorded history. It encompasses the time from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic age and leads to the founding of the First Dynasty. Although there are no written records from this period, archaeological digs have unearthed items that reveal the Nile River Valley's rich cultural history. This period is often named after the regions or ancient city sites where artifacts were discovered rather than the cultures that lived there. Cultural developments. The Halfin culture thrived circa 30,000 BCE in the area between Egypt and Nubia, giving rise to the Kadan and Sabellian cultures around 10,000 BCE, and the Harifian culture. These were hunter-gatherer societies that gradually became more sedentary and settled into permanent agricultural-based settlements. Emergence of the Fayum, a culture. The Fayum, a culture, emerged around 9000 to 6000 BCE in the Thiam Oasis, a natural basin southeast of the Giza Plateau. These people lived near a vast lake, relying on agriculture, hunting, and fishing. The Fayum people built reed homes with subterranean basements for food storage. They domesticated cattle, sheep, and goats, and basketry and pottery production flourished. Tribal chieftains assumed positions of power, which may have been passed down within families or tribal units. Over time, small traveling tribes grew into large groups of diverse tribes living together. Agricultural advancements. The Fayum, a culture, gave rise to the Merimde culture between 5000 to 4000 BCE. This culture is named from artifacts discovered at the location of that name on the western side of the Nile Delta. Most Egyptians during this time were farmers, and agriculture was the basis of the dynastic Egyptian economy. Farmers relied on the annual summer floods to grow their crops. The first Egyptian farmers were hunter-gatherers who planted crops like wheat, lentils, barley, flax, and peas, along with herding animals. The oldest levels of Merimde Beni Salama, which evolved between 8000 and 4000 BC, and the Fayum B culture, both date back to the Neolithic era. Irrigation and granaries. The Nile Valley's convex terrain encouraged the development of several basins, which in ancient times were flooded annually, bringing fertile silt. These basins, of which 130 have been found, served as reservoirs for the irrigation system. Granaries made of clay jars or baskets buried up to their necks in the earth were used to store the harvest. Cultural evolution and mummification. The Elomari culture, around 4000 BCE, developed on these foundations, building more complex circular homes with plastered mud walls. These cultures flourished in Lower Egypt, while Upper Egypt's civilization formed later. The inhabitants of the Badarian culture lived in movable tents, but preferred fixed homes. The Amratian period, also known as Naqada, followed, constructing more complex homes with windows and hearths, wattle and daub walls, and windbreaks around the main entryway. Around 3500 BCE, mummification began, with burial items still left with the deceased. Gurzian cultural advancements. The Gurzian culture, or Naqada II, from 3500 to 3200 BCE, spurred cultural and artistic changes through trade with other regions. Houses were built of sun-baked brick, with more opulent ones including courtyards. The city of Abydos became an important burial site, with huge tombs forming a necropolis. These tombs were originally made of mud bricks, but later of hewn limestone. This site became the burial place for Egypt's rulers, but evidence suggests that individuals from across the nation were buried at Abydos with burial gifts. By this time, the cities of Zois and Hierakonpolis were considered ancient, while Thinis, Naqada, and Nekhen were rapidly developing. The hieroglyphic alphabet, invented around 3400 to 3200 BCE, was used for maintaining records, though complete sentences were not found until the time of King Peribsen in the Second Dynasty, 500 years later. The earliest Egyptian writing discovered so far originates from Abydos and was found on pottery, clay seal imprints, and bone and ivory items. The early dynastic period, the Naqada III period, from 3200 to 3150 BCE, led to the early dynastic period and the start of Egypt's recorded history. As communities expanded, villages evolved into urban centers which clashed, likely over trade products and water resources. Thinis, Naqada, and Nekhen were the three principal city-states of Upper Egypt. Thinis appears to have defeated Naqada before absorbing Nekhen. These battles were fought between the Scorpion kings, whose identities are unknown, and others, most likely Ka and Narmer. According to some researchers, Scorpion Arav, Scorpion II, and Ka were the final three rulers of the proto-dynastic period before King Narmer unified Upper and Lower Egypt and created the First Dynasty. Establishment of the First Dynasty. The early dynastic period in Egypt, from 3150 to 2613 BCE, marks the beginning of the country's historical era. Upper and Lower Egypt were unified under centralized authority. The divine rule of the monarch began, and a distinct Egyptian culture emerged including the development of writing, arts, and sciences. Menes, the first king of Egypt, was a ruler of Upper Egypt, presumably from Thinis or Hierakonpolis. He defeated the other city-states before conquering Lower Egypt around 3150 BCE. Narmer married Princess Nithhotep of Naqada to strengthen ties between the two towns. He launched military operations in Lower Egypt to quell revolts and expanded his territory into Canaan and Nubia. He sponsored massive construction projects, and urbanization developed throughout his reign. The rule of Horaha and his successors. Horaha, Narmer's son, succeeded him around 3100 BCE, continuing his father's military expansion and increasing trade. He was interested in religion and the concept of the afterlife, and it was under his rule that the mastaba tomb was built. Horaha was succeeded by his son, Jer, in 3050 BCE, who followed in his father's footsteps. Jer's son, Jet, around 3000 BCE, married Princess Merneith. After his death, it's uncertain whether she governed as a regent for her infant son Den or as queen, but she is notable as the first woman recorded to have governed in ancient Egypt. Den, around 2990 BCE, is considered the greatest monarch of the first dynasty, reigning for 50 years. His reputation stems from his economic advances, military conquests, and the stability of his rule, evidenced by expensive construction projects and elaborate works of art. Den is the first monarch depicted wearing the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, showing that he ruled over a unified nation. Challenges in the first dynasty. Den was succeeded by two additional monarchs, Anajib and Semerkhet, both of whom had difficult reigns marked by insurgency. The dynasty ended with Khwa-ah, during whose reign his heirs struggled for the throne and were defeated by Hotep-Sekhemwi, who established the Second Dynasty. The Second Dynasty, from 2890 to 2670 BCE, was marked by internal strife and a lack of or misunderstanding of records. None of the Second Dynasty monarchs have reliable dates, and some kings' names appear to be repeats of earlier rulers. Hotep-Sekhemwi, which means two powerful ones at peace, is a prime example. His name suggests that he came to power after subduing princes who fought for the throne after Khwa-ah. However, his name is inscribed on the entrance to Khwa-ah's tomb, implying that he was the ruler responsible for burying Khwa, and that he already had that name before the succession war broke out. Hotep-Sekhemwi is credited with bringing peace to Egypt upon his ascension, although it was brief. Instability and rebellion marked his reign. Raneb, also known as Nebra, was the first to link his name to that of the gods, creating a bond between the monarch and the divine. There is no clear reason for Peribsen's decision. Early academics believed he was the first monotheist, declaring Set to be the sole deity, but evidence of his reign shows devotion to various gods. because his name is only found in Upper Egypt, it's possible that he chose to ally with Set for political reasons, to distinguish himself from the Horus religion of Lower Egypt. For whatever reason, he is regarded as a good monarch because commerce, the economy, religious practice, and the arts all thrive during his reign. Khasekhemwy and the Third Dynasty. Peribsen was replaced by Khasekhemwy, probably his son, who continued his predecessor's construction projects and is believed to have brought Egypt's two regions back under central control. His most famous works include the statues at Hierakonpolis and Abydos, as well as his role as the father of Pharaoh Djoser. Djoser and the Step Pyramid. The Egyptian Third Dynasty begins with King Djoser, best known for his step pyramid at Saqqara. Manetho's timeline is hazy on who was the predecessor of Djoser, and Sanakh's name is only known from the Abydos king list, the Turin papyrus, and two reliefs discovered in the Mastaba tomb number K2 at Beit Khalaf. Djoser erected so many monuments that historians assume his tenure lasted at least 20 years. He launched military campaigns to Sinai and maintained Egyptian unity, resulting in the stability required for construction projects and the growth of the arts. Djoser's step pyramid at Saqqara is Egypt's first recognized pyramid, designed by his architect and vizier Imhotep. Imhotep was a vizier, sage, architect, astrologer, and chief minister under Djoser, who was later deified and worshipped as the god of medicine in Egypt and Greece. He is thought to have designed the step pyramid in Memphis's Saqqara necropolis. This six-step pyramid is the world's oldest surviving stone monument, an inscription carrying his name on a statue of Djoser discovered near the Saqqara pyramid site attests to Imhotep's high status in Djoser's court, including titles such as leader of the sculptors and chief of the seers. The step pyramid's design and construction. Historical documents depicting Egyptian society and medicine throughout the Old Kingdom show that the main magician of the pharaoh's court frequently functioned as the nation's chief physician. The step pyramid began as a basic mastaba monument with a flat top and sloping sides, similar to previous tombs. The architect Imhotep had greater plans for his king's eternal dwelling. The step pyramid is a succession of mastabas piled on top of each other, each step slightly smaller than the one beneath. Earlier, mastabas were made of clay bricks, but the step pyramid was made of stone slabs with carved motifs of trees and reeds on them. When finished, the step pyramid stood 62 meters tall, making it the tallest building of its period. To deter robbers and secure the king's corpse and burial goods, the real chambers of the tomb were dug beneath the foundation as a maze of passageways with rooms. However, this strategy failed, and the tomb was robbed of all its valuables, including the king's corpse, with only his foot being discovered. Nonetheless, the step pyramid's design and building epitomize the genius and vision of the Third Dynasty builders, who laid the foundations for the later true pyramids of the Fourth Dynasty. The Age of Pyramids. The Old Kingdom of Egypt, also known as the Age of the Pyramids, includes the Great Fourth Dynasty, during which King Sneferu mastered pyramid construction, and the pyramids of Giza were built under the reigns of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. The historical documents of this time, the 4th to 6th dynasties, are sparse, and historians consider the history of the era as literally written in stone and mainly architectural. Academics have been able to build a history through the statues and their inscriptions. The pyramids themselves offer little information about their architects, but adjacent funerary shrines and stelae provide the king's names and other important information. Carvings in stone discovered elsewhere during the period document different events and their dates. The mausoleum of the 5th dynasty's last monarch, Unas, contained the first pyramid texts, detailed drawings, and writings inside the tomb that shed light on the religious views of the period. Art and society in the Old Kingdom. During the Old Kingdom, the elite produced standardized art and figures uniformly to reflect the tastes of Memphis, the capital. Although other art forms, such as painting and literature, show more skill in the Old Kingdom, statues from the late early dynastic and early Old Kingdom periods are very similar. The Old Kingdom's most famous works of art are the pyramids of Giza and the Great Sphinx of Giza. Egyptians placed great importance on Old Kingdom art and architecture in later ages. Although all levels of society may have shared the same religious systems, social inequality persisted even after death. The only significant impediment to reaching an afterlife was being buried outside of Egypt. Egyptians believed that to be reborn, they needed to be buried in Egypt. If they died abroad, relatives went to great lengths to bring their bodies back for burial so that correct funerary rituals could be performed, allowing them to enter the afterlife. To coordinate the labor force that constructed the pyramids at Giza and elsewhere, unprecedented bureaucratic efficiency was needed. This bureaucracy could only function under a powerful central authority. Structure of Egyptian society. At the top of this pyramid of Egyptian society stood the monarch, who, at least in theory, was granted ownership of all of Egypt by the gods. The Egyptian social structure was divided into literate and illiterate classes. The literate class, though a small fraction of the population, was the ruling class and determined the character of ancient Egyptian society. Individuals were often more important than the positions they held. While the king established the scope of bureaucratic power, effective administration was ultimately dependent on the same pool of literate aristocrats. Without them, the king could not govern. because an Egyptian king could not personally control every area of society. The role of the vizier was established as early as the early dynastic period. The vizier, who can be seen as a kind of prime minister, assigned responsibility to other members of the court, sent communications through scribes, and managed the military, regional governors' activities, public works projects, and tax collections, among other things. Sneferu and the Fourth Dynasty. Huni, the last king of the Third Dynasty, was long thought to have initiated the massive building projects of the Old Kingdom by constructing the Meidum Pyramid, but credit for that pyramid goes to Sneferu, the first king of the Fourth Dynasty, who may have been Huni's son by one of his minor queens. Sneferu began the Old Kingdom's golden era, with his most notable achievements being the two pyramids constructed for him at Dashur. Sneferu began with the pyramid at Meidum, known as the False Pyramid, because its shape resembles a tower more than a pyramid. The Meidum Pyramid was Egypt's first true pyramid, but it did not last because changes to Imhotep's initial design caused the exterior casing to sit on sand rather than rock, leading to its collapse. The Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid are Sneferu's structures at Dashur, or North Pyramid. The Bent Pyramid gets its name from the fact that it rises at a 55-degree angle and then changes to a 43-degree angle. The workers had finished the base and sides before recognizing that a 55-degree angle was too steep and changing their plan. Sneferu grasped the issue and went on to construct his third pyramid. The Red Pyramid's construction. Sneferu appears to have been a ruler unafraid of loss or sorrow. When the Bent Pyramid failed to satisfy his standards, he simply began work on the Red Pyramid. The Red Pyramid, named for its reddish limestone, was constructed on a firm foundation for better stability and rose at a 43-degree inclination. The Red Pyramid, 105 meters tall, was Egypt's first effective true pyramid. It was originally encased in white limestone, as were later pyramids, which crumbled away over time and were collected by locals for other construction projects. Following Djoser's complex at Saqqara, Sneferu had mortuary temples and other structures built around his pyramids, with priests overseeing day-to-day activities. All of this points to the stability of his rule, which he bequeathed to his son, Khufu, when he died. Khufu and the Great Pyramid. The ancient Greek authors referred to Khufu as Cheops. He is best known for his Great Pyramid at Giza. The Greeks portrayed him as a tyrant who oppressed the people and compelled them to labor against their will. This perception may have been created by tales in the Westcar Papyrus, a compilation of 4 stories written about the kings of the Fourth Dynasty. The papyrus contains 4 tales recounted by Khufu's sons, including one in which King Khufu summons a sorcerer who claims to be able to reconnect a decapitated head to a body. Some academics interpret his actions in requesting a demonstration as malicious. Economic and agricultural innovations. During the reign of Khufu, Egypt became even wealthier due to his military battles against Nubia and Libya, as well as his trade deals with cities such as Byblos. He also invested in agricultural innovations. During his reign, the world's first documented dam was constructed in Wadi Garawi, a mountain range west of modern Helwan. This dam improved water availability for farms. The Great Pyramid of Giza is the last of the ancient seven wonders of the world and a symbol of Egypt. It is located on the Giza Plateau, near the modern city of Cairo, and was constructed over 20 years during Khufu's rule. Although there are many hypotheses regarding the pyramid's purpose, the most widely accepted idea is that it was built as a tomb for the king. How it was constructed remains a mystery to this day. Historians continued to dispute the idea of ramps going around the outside of the building to move the blocks into position. Despite growing evidence proving that the pyramid was constructed by the ancient Egyptians using technical means that were common to them, many theories still exist. The complexity of the interior passages, shafts, and chambers, as well as the nearby Osiris shaft, encourages the persistence of fringe theories, as does the mystery of how the pyramid was built and its orientation to cardinal points. Hemiunu and the workforce. A prominent figure during this time, Hemiunu was the vizier during the reign of Khufu and one of the king's relatives. He was in charge of building the Great Pyramid and overseeing its construction. He was buried near Khufu's pyramid. The construction work of the pyramid was done by expert and unskilled laborers employed by the state. These employees either offered to pay off a debt, perform community service, or were paid for their time. The annual inundation of the Nile was crucial for Egyptian survival because it distributed rich soil from the riverbank. However, it also made farming those lands impossible during the flood. During these times, the government provided work for farms by constructing large monuments. These were the individuals who performed the physical labor of moving stones, elevating obelisks, constructing temples, and building the pyramids that continue to amaze people today. Succession and the Great Sphinx. Khufu was replaced by a family member outside the legal line named Djedefre. Djedefre was Khufu's son, but did not appear to be his designated heir. Some scholars believe Djedefre built the Great Sphinx of Giza, while others believe it was his sibling and successor, Khafra. The Sphinx is the world's biggest monolithic monument, showing a recumbent lion's torso with a king's head and visage. Historically, this king's visage has been identified as Khafra's, but Dobrev and others believe it is Khufu's. It appears to have been constructed by Khafra. because it is aligned with his pyramid complex, and the Sphinx's face resembles Khafra more than Khufu. Khafra and Menkaura. Khafra's pyramid is the second largest in Giza, and his complex is almost as large as his father's. Little is known about his rule. According to Egyptian texts, he continued his father's policies and government model, concentrating power in the hands of his closest family members. Following Khafra's demise, succession was disrupted when Baka, Jedefre's son, took the throne. He did not rule for even a year before Menkaura, Khafra's son, took over as monarch. Both the Greeks and Egyptian writings praise Menkaura. Like his father and grandfather, Menkaura started construction on his Giza pyramid and shrine complex. Menkaura's pyramid and complex are smaller than the other two. This represents a development in the history of the Old Kingdom and one of the causes of its collapse. The resources needed to construct the Great Pyramid were no longer available during Menkaura's period. Despite reigning for 30 years, he was unable to finish the work of his predecessors. Historians attribute this to the dwindling resources. Shepseskaf, Menkaura's successor, finished Menkaura's structure at Giza, but was buried in a relatively modest mastaba at Saqqara. Decline of the Old Kingdom. The monarchs diverted immense resources to their funerary structures and buildings, but these temples and sanctuaries were increasingly under the authority of the priests who managed them rather than the king. Although the Giza Plateau is now a desolate site on the outskirts of Cairo, it was a city of the deceased, inhabited by the living who tended to it. During Menkaura's time, Giza had priests' houses, shrines, worker accommodations, stores, factories, breweries, and all the amenities of a small metropolis. Daily life of ancient Egyptians. Civilian life in ancient Egypt was very active. The lowest social class consisted of peasant farmers who did not own the land or the houses they lived in. The monarch, members of the court, nomarchs, regional governors, and priests owned the land. Peasants would start the day saying, "Let us work for the nobility." Regardless of what other trade they practiced, peasants were always farmers. They cultivated and harvested their crops, giving the majority to the landowner while keeping part for themselves. Most had private gardens maintained by the women, while the men worked in the fields. This lowest stratum of society created the items used in commerce, allowing the civilization to survive. These peasants were also part of the workforce that erected Egypt's pyramids and other monuments. When the Nile River's banks overflowed, making farming difficult, men and women went to work on the king's projects. This labor was always rewarded, and no evidence supports the assertion that Egypt's major monuments were erected by slave labor. Opportunities for advancement. Work-building monuments such as pyramids and associated burial complexes temples and obelisks provided the peasantry with the sole possibility of upward mobility. Guild painters and engravers, in particular, were in high demand and were paid more than unskilled laborers. Peasant farmers could also raise their status by learning a craft and producing vases, bowls, plates, and other ceramics. Skilled carpenters could make a fortune by making tables, desks, chairs, beds, and storage chests, while painters were needed to decorate upper-class dwellings, castles, tombs, and monuments. Brewers were also held in high regard, and breweries were sometimes controlled by women. Beer was the most popular beverage in ancient Egypt, and it was commonly used as a kind of recompense. Workers on the Giza Plateau were given a beer ration 3 times a day. The deity Osiris was said to have provided the drink to the people, and brewers were overseen by the goddess Tenenet. Marriage and recreation. Marriages were more secular than religious in ancient Egypt. Parents planned the majority of weddings in all classes. Girls were often married at the age of 12, and boys at the age of 15. Royal offspring were frequently promised to foreign monarchs as babies to seal treaties. The lives of ancient Egyptians were not all work. They found time to have fun by participating in sports, board games, and other activities. Hockey, handball, archery, swimming, tug-of-war, gymnastics, rowing, and a sport called water jousting, sea battle in small boats on the Nile, were all ancient Egyptian sports. The festivals of ancient Egypt were distinct, depending on the occasion, but all had drinking and feasting in common. The Egyptian diet consisted mostly of grains, wheat, and vegetables. The meat was incredibly expensive and only affordable to royalty. The 5th dynasty begins. The 4th dynasty ended with Shepseskaf's brief reign, and the 5th dynasty began with less hope. The 5th dynasty is known as the Sun King's dynasty because many of their titles contain the name of the deity Ra. The first 3 of these rulers, Userkaf, Sahure, and Kakai, would later be memorialized as divinely chosen in the Westkar papyrus tale, The Birth of the Kings. The dynasty starts with King Userkaf, but a lady named Kentkaus, most likely a daughter of Menkaura, appears prominently as the mother of 2 kings of Upper and Lower Egypt. It is unclear who those monarchs were. Her monument is the 4th pyramid of Giza, and she was a significant figure. Userkaf is best known for his work on the Temple of the Sun at Abu Sir. This structure represents a significant divergence from the position of the monarch at the beginning of the 4th dynasty and the beginning of the end of Giza as the king's necropolis. The sun deity Ra was now venerated directly by the people through the priesthood, reducing the king's position as the god's primary representative. Sahur and the expansion of trade. Userkaf's son, Sahur, replaced him and constructed his funerary complex at Abu Sir, near the Temple of the Sun. Sahura was a capable monarch who led the first Egyptian expedition to Punt and arranged trade treaties with other countries. Punt was one of his biggest accomplishments, becoming an important source of many of Egypt's most valuable resources and eventually regarded as a legendary country of the gods. Sahur constructed his own temple to the sun in Abu Sir and was the first to use palmiform columns in the building, which would later become the norm for columns throughout Egypt. Sahur's war exploits and cautious resource management enriched the nation, as demonstrated by the intricate work on his mortuary complex. His son, Neferkare Kakai, succeeded him. Inscriptions suggest he was a good and well-regarded king, but little is known of his tenure, except that the priesthood became more dominant. His son, Neferefre, succeeded him but died young, possibly around the age of 20. He was followed by Shepseskare, who was succeeded by Nusere-Ini. During his rule, the priests of Ra acquired even more authority. The bureaucracy of temples and mortuary buildings grew as well, putting a burden on royal coffers. Menkaure Kayu replaced him, but little is known about his rule other than that he was the last monarch to construct a temple to the sun. Signs of strain in the Old Kingdom. The Old Kingdom, with its pyramid-building frenzy and centralized power structure, had begun to show signs of strain. Djedkare Isesi, who ruled in the late 25th to mid-24th century BC, recognized the need for change. He was not regarded as the son of his predecessor, but may have been related, suggesting a possible power struggle. His reign was not marked by grand military conquests or extravagant building projects. Instead, he turned his attention inward to the very foundations of Egyptian society. Djedkare Isesi's reforms. The shift in power. Djedkare Isesi implemented significant administrative and religious reforms. He broke from the tradition of erecting a shrine to the sun deity, Ra, and reduced the number of priests required to maintain funerary structures. This is a striking departure from the actions of previous rulers during the Old Kingdom, when the sun god's priests were gaining more power. This shift signaled the beginning of a decentralization of power, moving away from the absolute authority of the pharaoh and towards the growing influence of local officials. Economic stabilization efforts. Djedkare Isesi understood that a stable economy was key to a stable kingdom. He organized a second expedition to Punt, a legendary land that provided many of Egypt's valuable resources and reinforced trade relations. These efforts to promote commerce and manage resources would prove vital in the face of challenges to come. This act also further reduced the power of the priests and increased it in the government sector. Decline of the Old Kingdom. Djedkare Isesi's reforms, while necessary, set the stage for the decline of the Old Kingdom. His successor, Unas, was the first Egyptian king to have the interior of his tomb decorated and inscribed with what became known as the Pyramid Texts. However, this was the start of more power to local officials. The seeds of decentralization had been sown, and by the time the Sixth Dynasty started, the position of the king was already significantly reduced. Local officials and bureaucrats built more elaborate tombs than nobles, a clear indication of their rising power. Fragmentation and end of the Old Kingdom. The end of the Old Kingdom came with a whimper, not a bang. The political power had fragmented and the system was decentralized. The central government was crumbling as the power of the nomarchs. Local officials increased. The reins of control had slipped from the grasp of the Pharaohs. There was no strong leader to guide the people, and local authorities focused on their own areas and lacked the desire and the resources to assist the rest of the nation. Pepi II and the First Intermediate Period. The lengthy rule of Pepi II, who ascended to the throne as a child, marked the slow disintegration of the Old Kingdom. He outlived all his potential heirs, and by the time he died, there was no one suitable to take over. The state struggled to react to the drought and famine. The First Intermediate Period started with the death of the Sixth Dynasty. The First Intermediate Period was a time of change, and some might argue, chaos. The First Intermediate Period. The great structures of the Old Kingdom ceased to be built. The cultural image that comes from historical data does not support a dark era, but rather a different social and political model than what had come before. Without a powerful central government, the country's regions were essentially self-governing. The kings of the 7th and 8th dynasties were ineffectual, and their identities and dates would be forgotten in Egyptian annals. The city of Memphis was abandoned by rulers who saw themselves as the heirs of the Old Kingdom. The rulers of the 9th and 10th dynasties then seized Heracleopolis as their center and declared themselves Egypt's real kings. Emergence of the Middle Kingdom. But out of this disarray emerged a new hope. Around 2125 BC, Intef, a Theban nomarch, rose to prominence, challenging the authority of the Heracleopolitan kings. Intef established the 11th dynasty, providing the push for the country's unity during the Middle Kingdom. He was known as Intef the Mighty. The road to unification continued with Mentuhotep I, approximately 2115 BCE, who followed Intef's path and conquered the neighboring nomes for Thebes, significantly increasing the city's stature and strength. The true architect of this reunification was his successor, Mentuhotep II. Mentuhotep II's unification. He was known as the Second Menace, who united Egypt and ushered in the Middle Kingdom period. Mentuhotep II defeated Heracleopolis and then punished those nomes who had stayed faithful to the old kings whilst rewarding those that were loyal to Thebes. Following the process of unification, he devoted his time to ruling, military accomplishments, and construction projects. Mentuhotep III maintained and expanded on his programs, including an army to Punt and strengthening the northern borders. His successor, Mentuhotep IV's reign was silent, but he most likely continued his predecessor's policies effectively because the nation was thriving. Middle Kingdom prosperity. The Middle Kingdom was a time of stability and prosperity, where the pharaohs once again wielded significant power. Thebes had now become a significant city, the center of the kingdom. The Middle Kingdom kings, including Amenemhat, who succeeded Mentuhotep IV, understood that a strong infrastructure and a flourishing economy were vital for maintaining their power. Amenemhat I abandoned Thebes for unknown reasons and established his seat in court at Ich-Tawi, south of Memphis. He was originally Mentuhotep IV's vizier and was said to be chosen by the gods to become king after witnessing miracles whilst on a mission to quarry stones for the king's project. Centralized power and infrastructure. Centralized power. Amenemhat I restricted the authority of local nomarchs and priests, ensuring power remained centralized with the monarch. This strategy was continued by his successor, Senusret III, who improved the country's infrastructure and initiated grand building projects. Irrigation. The Egyptians developed advanced irrigation systems, building nilometers to gauge the height of the flood and to determine the level of taxes to be paid. Canals were dug to provide water to different areas. Senusret I was responsible for developing the specific irrigation system in the Fayum area, including a dike that transported water from Lake Morris. Trade and military campaigns. Prosperity and trade. The Middle Kingdom saw an increase in trade and military campaigns into Nubia and Palestine. These expeditions improved prosperity in the nation. The most potent monarch of this period was Senusret III. His reign was so prosperous that he was deified during his lifetime. Senusret III exemplified the Egyptian cultural value of military ability and quick action, and his expeditions into Nubia widened Egypt's borders. Agricultural innovations. He also conducted an expedition into Palestine, which improved trade. The Egyptian people were intimately connected to the land. Agriculture was the lifeblood of their civilization. The Nile provided the fertile soil needed to grow crops such as wheat, grapes, palm dates, figs, and papyrus. They used innovative irrigation tools like the shatif, a hand-operated device used to lift water from the river. They documented all aspects of their daily life, including the process of growing and harvesting their grains in detail. They also built earth and stone barrages and dams to control floodwaters and direct irrigation. Construction advances. As ever, the Egyptians were masters of construction. They moved colossal statues using methods we are still trying to fully understand. Jehunakht, a nomarch of the 12th dynasty, has a scene in his tomb showing the transportation of a 6.8 meters high monument of him by 172 people. Amenemhat III was responsible for the vast mortuary sanctuary at Hawara, known as the Labyrinth. End of the 12th dynasty. However, the 12th dynasty came to an end when Sobekneferu, the first woman to rule Egypt since the early dynastic period, died without an heir. The 13th dynasty maintained the policies of the 12th, but none had the power of the previous kings. The seeds of discord were sown, and Lower Egypt began to develop its own political groups. The Egyptian rulers relocated the capital from Ichtawi to Thebes, further weakening their grip on the north. This led to the rise of a foreign power. The Hyksos, a group of Semitic people, were allowed to settle in the far north at the beginning of the 12th dynasty. Hyksos influence. They settled in a small settlement called Avaris, which developed into a commercial hub. By the end of the 13th dynasty, the Hyksos had grown wealthy and powerful and started to wield governmental power in the nation. They were known to the Egyptians as Hekakaset, or Hyksos. The Hyksos achieved economic dominance of the eastern delta and then pushed north, negotiating treaties and forging contracts with other nomes until they conquered a large amount of territory. The Hyksos elevated Egyptians to positions of power, adopting Egyptian customs, attire, and religious beliefs. They established the 15th dynasty in Egypt. Nubian and Hyksos expansion. Whilst the Hyksos were rising to prominence in the north, the Nubians rose to power in the south. The Middle Kingdom had neglected its southern frontier, and as a result, the Kingdom of Kush had developed into a centralized power with its capital at Kerma. The second intermediate period was a time of division and conflict, with the Theban kings rising to challenge the Hyksos. King Apepi of the Hyksos wrote to the Theban king Sekenenre Tau, demanding that he do away with a hippopotamus pool near Thebes. This was an insult to the Thebans and a sign of their desire to exert control. Theban resistance. The Hyksos worshipped Seth, who was the main god in the Hyksos capital, Avaris. In the same vein, Theban leaders such as Sekenenre Tau worshipped Horus, who was the arch-enemy of Seth. As a result, hippopotamuses were viewed as sacred in Thebes because they were believed to have been connected with Seth. This message was more of a challenge to his autonomy than a direct command, and so Tau marched on Avaris. Tau was killed in battle, and the Thebans were defeated. Kamose and Amos's campaigns. The fight was taken up by Tau's successor, Kamose. Kamose launched a huge attack on the Hyksos, destroying Avaris. Whilst his tale of the battle may be exaggerated, he did show that the Hyksos were no longer invincible. He was succeeded by his brother Ahmose, who drove the Hyksos out of Egypt and destroyed Avaris. This event led to the beginning of the New Kingdom. Beginning of the New Kingdom. The expulsion of the Hyksos by Amos. I marked the beginning of the New Kingdom, a period of unprecedented prosperity and success in Egypt. Amos not only established the 18th dynasty, but also a professional Egyptian army of conquest. Amos sought to ensure that no foreign nation ever gained such dominance again. He established protected areas around Egypt's borders and fortified settlements in strategic locations. He also conducted military excursions south against the kingdom of Cush. Thutmose Rufer's military expansions. Amos's successor, Amenhotep I, followed in his father's policies, but only commanded battles in Nubia. Thutmose replaced him and immediately started wars to expand Egypt's reach. Thutmose I put down a revolt in Nubia and then extended Egypt's control further south. He then shifted his focus to Palestine and Syria and built numerous temples. During this period of great power, Egypt was ruled by one of its most effective leaders, Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut's reign. She was the half-sister and wife of Thutmose II, and when he died, she was made regent for his young son, Thutmose III. However, she was the real power behind her husband's tenure and continued to do so after his death. She was in charge of many construction projects, including the successful expedition to Punt. She also added to the temple at Karnak and governed in harmony in the south. Her construction works were so impressive that later pharaohs claimed ownership of them and removed her name from her structures. Thutmose III's empire building. When Hatshepsut died, Thutmose III took over. He established the Egyptian empire, which his descendants would maintain. Thutmose III defeated neighboring countries using the war chariots acquired from the Hyksos, as well as new weapons and better strategies. He led at least 17 separate military campaigns, subduing kingdoms from Libya to Syria and extending Egypt's authority in the south. Battle of Megiddo. The Battle of Megiddo. One of the most notable campaigns was the Battle of Megiddo. The king of Kadesh instigated a revolt in Canaan. Thutmose III marched his army from Thebes to Megiddo, choosing a narrow pass instead of an easier route, and surprised his enemies by entering the Kina Valley behind their defensive positions. He then had to lay siege to the city. The account of this battle, written by his military scribe, Janeni, was written on the walls of the great temple of Amun at Karnak. Amenhotep III's prosperity. Thutmose III was succeeded by his son Amenhotep II, who inherited a powerful kingdom. He was not a warrior king, but he did order many construction projects. Thutmose IV carried on his programs. He is best known for the rebuilding of Giza's Great Pyramid. Then came Amenhotep III, who is regarded as one of Egypt's most effective rulers. He ruled during a time of artistic, political, and financial peak for Egypt. He used his riches to persuade other nations to do as he desired. He expanded the borders and devoted himself to construction projects. Many of Egypt's most impressive structures date from his rule. Akhenaten's religious reforms. However, Amenhotep III's reign also saw the growing power of the priests of Amun. They possessed more power than the monarch and used it to enrich themselves. Amenhotep III attempted to contain this influence by aligning himself with the deity Aten, a minor deity represented by a sun disk. His son, Amenhotep IV, took this further, becoming known as Akhenaten and establishing monotheism. Akhenaten dissolved the old religion and raised Aten to be the one true God. He moved the capital from Thebes to Amarna, shutting the old sanctuaries and prohibiting their worship. He also built a shrine to Aten at Karnak's great temple of Amun. Tutankhamun's restoration. Akhenaten's reign was short-lived, and after his death, his young son Tutankhamun took to the throne. He quickly changed his name and moved the capital back to Memphis and restored Thebes as a religious center. He reopened the temples and restored Egypt's ancient religion, whilst he instituted significant changes that secured the nation. He is best known for his magnificent tomb discovered by Howard Carter in 1922. Horemheb's reforms. After Tutankhamun's death, there was a period of uncertainty until the general Horemheb took control. He sought to erase the Amarna period from Egyptian history, burning Akhenaten's statues, demolishing his sanctuary, and restoring Egyptian religion and customs. His efforts to restore Egyptian glory were continued by Ramses I, the founder of the 19th dynasty. Ramses I was an elderly man when he ascended to the kingdom and swiftly named his son Seti I as his successor. Ramses II and the Battle of Kadesh. Seti I continued to rebuild Egypt's sanctuaries and shrines, adding to the Temple of Amun at Karnak. He also led military missions to reclaim areas lost during Akhenaten's rule. His son, Ramses II, was one of the most well-known pharaohs of Egypt. He governed for 67 years, building magnificent monuments to celebrate his accomplishments. The Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BC was one of his most celebrated accomplishments. The Hittites, who were gaining power in Anatolia, had been putting Egypt to the test. Horemheb had previously waged war unsuccessfully against them, and Seti I had gained Palestine and Kadesh, but had made no plans for the defense of the city. Ramses II gathered his forces at Pi-Ramses in 1274 BC and marched his first division so quickly that they outdistanced the other three. The Hittites had fortified the city of Kadesh and had 37,000 men and 3,500 chariots waiting. The Hittites ambushed Ramses II, but the Egyptian army eventually arrived and defeated the Hittites on the field. Whilst Ramses II did not capture the city, he did break the Hittite army. Ramses II's peace treaty. However, perhaps one of Ramses II's greatest acts was not one of war, but one of peace. He forged the first peace treaty in history with the Hittites. Ramses II was succeeded by his 12th son, Merneptah. Merneptah and the Sea Peoples. He adopted his father's image as a warrior monarch, defeating the Libyans and repelling the Sea Peoples. The description of his exploits includes the first reference to the Israelites as a tribe. The Sea Peoples were a mysterious group of invaders whose origins are unknown. All of the records are from Egyptian sources. The great pharaohs of this time, Ramses II, Merneptah, and Ramses III, all claimed huge victories against these people. Ramses III's challenges. Ramses III was the last powerful pharaoh of the New Kingdom. The Sea Peoples invaded and destroyed the Egyptian commerce hub at Kadesh, then attempted to invade Egypt. Ramses III was aware of his predecessors' battles with these people. He used guerrilla tactics against them, setting up ambushes along the coast and Nile Delta. His archers were especially effective, setting the ships on fire with burning arrows. He defeated them off the coast of Zois in 1178 BC. Whilst the battle was a victory for the Egyptians, it was costly, and the royal treasury was depleted. The tomb builders at Deir el-Medina could not be paid, which resulted in the first documented labor strike in history. End of the New Kingdom. The New Kingdom was coming to an end. The office of Pharaoh no longer held the same reverence. The priests of Amun served as an intermediary between the gods, drawing income and influence away from the monarchy. Ramses III was injured in an assassination attempt and died as a result of his injuries. His successors fought to keep the empire together, but were unable to. The pharaohs were fighting to retain control from the priests of Amun. By the end of the 20th dynasty, the nation was divided. Division and the Third Intermediate Period. Smendes, a ruler of Lower Egypt, took control from Tanis, whilst the priests of Thebes asserted their authority in Upper Egypt. This division did not end in civil war, but the two powers had very little influence outside of their regions. The Third Intermediate Period was characterized by the strengthening of local nomarchs. The 22nd dynasty was established by Shoshenq III, a Libyan ruler who unified Egypt. Shoshenq I and Kushite influence. He embarked on military operations reminiscent of Egypt's empire days and reformed Tanis and Thebes. Whilst he reinvigorated Egypt's economy, the country once again split into different kingdoms after his rule. The Kushite ruler, Kashta, moved to exploit Egypt's vulnerability, moving into Egypt around 750 BC. His son, Piye, strengthened Nubian dominance of Upper Egypt, and when the kings of Lower Egypt protested, he led a large army and conquered Lower Egypt. Egypt was now under Nubian control, but the lower Egyptian kings were allowed to regroup and re-establish their power. Psamtik I's restoration. In the 26th dynasty, Psamtik I was a powerful ruler who instilled in his people the grandeur of Egypt's past by restoring the land through massive projects and military feats. He strengthened his army, and his son, Necho II, continued his legacy by conducting military battles and expanding the army. The Egyptians had not been great seafarers, and so Necho II established a fleet of Greek mercenaries. Necho II was portrayed as a great military leader who strengthened the nation. Amasis II was successful in reforming government spending whilst also stimulating the economy. The building projects, temples, and art completed in this time helped to regain some of Egypt's lost luster. Persian influence and resistance. However, this was not to last. His son, Psamtik III, was a young and inexperienced king and was not prepared for the difficulties he faced. The Persian monarch, Cambyses II, had sent to Amasis asking for one of his daughters as a bride. Amasis, unwilling to obey, sent a priest's daughter instead, who revealed her true identity when she reached the palace. Cambyses II vowed to avenge Amasis's slander. Darius, who ascended to the throne of the Achaemenid Empire in 522 BC, wanted to govern Egypt in his absence. He toured Egypt twice, dedicating funds to the reconstruction of destroyed temples. He praised the Egyptian gods with presents and statues. The Persians ruled Egypt during the 27th and 31st dynasties, but Egyptian culture was kept alive. Egyptian resistance to Persian control was visible. Egypt under Persian rule. This era comprises the 27th to 31st dynasties of Egypt. The Persians respected the culture. Amartayus, Nectanebo I, and Nectanebo II all governed the nation, commanded troops, and participated in construction projects like the great pharaohs of the past. Alexander the Great and modern Egypt. But Egypt was not to remain under Persian rule. Philip II of Macedon defeated the Greek city-states and was preparing an expedition to subjugate Persia before he was murdered. His son, Alexander the Great, would eventually carry out this mission. The pharaohs of the 30th dynasty had upheld the honor of Egyptian kingship. So, whilst the late period may be considered the end of Egyptian sovereignty, it should not be considered the end of Egyptian civilization. The Egyptian culture would continue even after the Greeks took over. Modern Egypt is a country that looks forward, but has never forgotten its past. The Nile still flows through the heart of the nation. The festivals are inspired by ancient celebrations. The food is influenced by ancient traditions. The Coptic language, a descendant of the ancient language, is still spoken in churches today. Pride in Egypt's legacy. The people are proud of their legacy. This was seen in the parades that were done in Cairo for the transportation of the mummies to the Civilisation's museum and the reopening of the alley of the sphinxes in Luxor. They are building new cities and digging their way to improve commerce. They have almost opened the largest museum in the world. Excavations continue every day, revealing new discoveries, which might soon lead to another discovery, like the tomb of Tutankhamun. And this land will always remain an attractive mystery, dazzling and enchanting people from all over the world with its magic and history.
you.